Meet Andrew Asher, the 27-year-old CEO and founder of Lucid Bots, a robotics company committed to pioneering technology that physically interacts with our world, performing productive tasks. Currently, they have two major products: a drone that soft washes exterior buildings, and a robotic surface cleaner that does flat work. Today, I'm sitting down with him for a lengthy conversation about what has shaped him, the company, and where it's headed for the future.
All right, so I want to start at the beginning, and perhaps even before the beginning. Can you talk a bit about what high school was like for you, and not just school itself, but kind of just your life at that time?
Oh gosh, that's a great question to start with. I'm actually going to take you back to my middle school years because it segues obviously into high school. I grew up in a small town in Northern Virginia where everybody knew everybody, and I lived there my whole life, had a great group of friends, and always thought I was going to go to the local high school, Madison, because that's where all my friends were going. Like, obviously, That's what I wanted to do. But my dad, since I was one, taught at a private school in the area, Georgetown Prep. And I never thought it was for me. I was like, there's this school, it's in another state, it's in Maryland. I don't know anybody, it's an all-guy school. It seemed really esoteric, so I'm like, that's not for me. But I've got a brother who's 5 years older than me, and I idolize him. I always have. And he's very impressive, so he's worthy of being idolized. And it was at his high school graduation where he was winning accolade after accolade, got into Duke no problem, that I started to think, maybe I would be interested in going to this school. And it was like a light just switched on in my mind of, okay, what would it look like to go to Georgetown Prep versus stay where I was comfortable, where I knew everyone? And again, this was an unsettling thought because I still to this day have a lot of great friends from all the way back to elementary school. So the thought of leaving them behind was a lot. But I remember reading a quote at the time that stuck with me, which is, "A ship is safest in harbor, but that's not what a ship is built for." And that's how I ultimately made my high school decision. I decided to go to Georgetown Prep, follow my brother, take classes with my dad, which was a fun experience. And freshman year was just really hard because I had no social network. Yeah. I saw my friends kind of in parallel having their own high school experience and trying to maintain those relationships. And on the weekend, I would go back to Virginia, and all my friends at school would stay in Maryland, and I couldn't drive. So I felt like I was this awkward middle ground of, trying to stay close with my friends from Virginia, trying to build new bridges at my new school. But it ended up going really well. To this day, I've got great friends from high school. And as I reflect over my high school career, I think what I appreciate most was the Jesuit education. As the years go on, a lot of the specific memories from classes fade. I knew a lot about the War of 1812 at one point. Don't quiz me on it right now. But I think some of the biggest lessons that stuck with me were those Jesuit ideals. What does it mean to be a man for others? What does it mean to see God in all things? And I feel like above all else, one of the things I learned was the importance of compassion. Compassion is this magic ingredient in life that allows you to build bridges and relationships, where in today's society, I think too many folks are grounded in hate and immediately put up walls between themselves. But compassion allows you to meet somebody where they're at, get to know them, get to understand their story. Why do they have the perspectives they have? Maybe the last two thoughts from high school. One was it was very competitive. We didn't necessarily do the normal ABC grading system. We did percentages. So you knew people by the percentage, their overall weighted average.
Exactly where you stand.
That kid's an 88. Oh, he's a 96. He's super smart. And it was so objective of who was the smartest, the lower end. But also from an athletic standpoint, there were a tremendous amount of great athletes. I still got friends from high school playing professionally at various sports. So it was an environment where you were just filled with overachievers. And I'd say the last part, going to high school with your dad is a unique experience because he taught pretty much every freshman at the school. So they all knew him. They all knew we were related. And of all the classes I took, my favorite one was being in the choir with him. I think in part because he let me get away with some things I probably shouldn't have. But I also just enjoyed the experience of performing, of singing, and it was in part because it made me really uncomfortable. In high school, I could get up on a mound and pitch in front of hundreds and hundreds of fans and not think anything of it. And then I would get up and sing a solo at our Christmas concert, and I would be shaking up until the time it ends. So it forced me to grow in ways that other opportunities didn't.
And do you think that even still has implications today? Like even say when you're presenting at investor meetings or maybe you're doing a talk for people, do you think that even something as far back as being in the choir has kind of helped with the nerves as far as that goes?
100%. I'd say it's foundational. Even to this day, for big pitches or big meetings, I think it's right and just to get a little bit of nerves because it shows you really care about what you're doing. But at that age, just getting exposed to an environment where you're doing something that makes you uncomfortable, you're standing up there on your own with nobody behind you and you're singing a solo. It's kind of like being on stage pitching to a room full of investors. So it's something I'm really appreciative for, and I would highly recommend all high school students consider some form of performing arts.
So fast forwarding a bit, transitioning out of high school and into college, you went to Davidson on a full ride for baseball, right?
It was baseball and academics.
Okay.
I wasn't good enough for just baseball.
Got you. And so when you first went into college, what was kind of your aspirations? Were you thinking, hey, I'm going to try to really pursue athletics and make this a thing? Like what was the roadmap of your life at that time?
It was a roller coaster ride. And I'd say there was a very wide spectrum of what I considered. Growing up, I think one of the worst questions you can ask a kid is, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because if a 7-year-old sits there and says, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, for some reason the natural reaction of adults is to give them positive reinforcement like, oh yes, my kid wants to go on to be a doctor.
One of the stereotypical high income.
When you're 7, you don't understand what med school entails, what residency entails. Do you actually want to work in the healthcare system? For some people, it is an excellent career. But we get misleaded because of the reactions, I think, of adults to that question from a young age. But when I got asked that, I just answered very honestly, I've got no idea what I want to do. And I think in part it's because I'm so passionate about so many things. I'm like, I could really like engineering. I could like being a lawyer. I could become a doctor. I have no idea what I want to do. So when I went into college, my first thought was I wanted to do something within medicine. I watched my brother go through the pre-med track, go through medical school, and I said to myself, ooh, that looks like a lot of school, and I'd love to learn, but I don't really like sitting in a classroom. So is there another alternative? And I started by thinking maybe I want to be a doctor of physical therapy and focus on sports med. Quickly I learned that's not what I wanted to do because my freshman year, I just became absolutely obsessed with my economics classes. And as I was sitting in organic chemistry, I was just thinking to myself, how many more lecture halls do I need to sit through like this in order to become a doctor? And from my perspective, I was like, I don't think I can do it. So I started to consider, okay, well, I've always been very interested in finance. I'll explore what that career path could look like. And for a while, I thought maybe I'd go into wealth management and be a personal financial advisor. And around my junior year, which starts to get into the lucid transition, I remember having a conversation with the gentleman who endows my scholarship. He helped build McKinsey into the consulting giant they are today with a great reputation. So in my head, I was like, oh, what do ambitious juniors at Davidson do? They go into management consulting or investment banking. So I called him asking what he thought about joining McKinsey, really just fishing for a recommendation. And the advice he gave me truly changed my life because he just stopped me in my tracks and goes, don't do it. And I was taken aback thinking, well, you helped build this practice into the mega player they are today. Why would you recommend somebody not do it? And what he told me is, he said for Davidson students, but I think for a lot of college students it's true, consulting's become a placeholder for folks. It's what you do until you figure out what you really want to do, whether it's You go on to get your MBA, you find an industry or company you're really passionate about, and you join them. And what he challenged me was, Andrew, think about what you really want to do and focus on doing that. And that then left me with a whole nother set of questions, which is, what is it I really want to do?
I think that's a very meaningful thing for people to hear, and especially having just recently gone through the college process myself, I've come across a lot of people who have kind of had that sentiment where they're like, I have no idea what I want to do. And that kind of terrified a lot of them. And I think even like just hearing this from you now, someone who's now kind of figured out what is meaningful to them, I think can really serve as something helpful to people. So I do appreciate you saying that. So on that note, you're in college, okay? And I've heard some stuff about your college days. I've heard that at one point, you know, you were double major, right? On top of that, 3 part-time jobs. I also heard some rumblings of you got to the point where in the earlier days of Lucid, you would fast for days so you could buy drone parts.
Yes.
Can you just touch a little bit on like what the heck that was like? Like what was going through your mind for you to be so committed to this project, to this idea, that you were willing to do something like that? Especially as like a college kid. You know, college kids are like hungry all the time. And so to like fully skip meals, I think you have to be really committed to something to do that.
Oh gosh, this is a very loaded answer. So on the first part, let's call it division of the day and time allocations. Surprisingly, I slept very well in college, and I don't know how, because to your point, I was doing 2 majors. I was playing a Division I sport where we had at least 52 games a season, which is a pretty brutal schedule because we're playing 4 games a week. We've got a lot of road trips. On top of that, I was working 3 part-time jobs, and then decided since I didn't have anything else to do, I should just go ahead and start a technology company. I will say in college I didn't skip meals because I wanted to be as good at baseball as I possibly could be. And skipping meals would have been pretty bad in terms of trying to retain my strength and all those good things to be a good teammate. But I decided to graduate after my junior year and focus on the company full time. And in that first year, I mean, we just didn't have money. Like, founding a robotics company is very capital intensive, and we didn't have a lot of capital. So at one point, I was literally fasting for days just to save money to buy the new GPS chips or buy the controller. I think the longest I ended up going was about 120 hours. Jeez. And it's enlightening and humbling to go that long without food, and it does shift your perspective and make you realize, like, what else can you do? I'd say one story to layer in there. I remember how life-changing it felt when we found out we got into Y Combinator, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself.
We're going to touch on that eventually, but you can for sure.
And at the time, when you get into Y Combinator, you get $150,000 for your company, which was monumental capital for us at the time. But they hadn't wired the money yet when we were starting to move out to California. And I'm driving this old Toyota, the air conditioning had gone out, and I'm driving through Texas in June. I drove from North Carolina to California in 68 hours. And for those wondering, it's about a 42-hour drive from Charlotte to San Francisco. And I also did it without eating, which now that I look back on it, one of our top values, in fact, our top value as a company is safety and quality. It was not the safest of decisions to have made to drive across country without food, but I was still nervous. I was like, well, I don't know when we're going to get money. Are we going to get the money? They say it's happening, but at that point, I was just so convicted in the thought, somebody needs to build this solution. Somebody has to solve this problem, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to be that person.
That's incredible. So just dialing it back a little bit, we'll get into Y Combinator eventually. But when Lucid first started and you kind of had this whole concept with a cleaning drone, was the thought always to be a manufacturer of these drones that sold these to other people? Or was there at one point where maybe that was your own just kind of exclusive way of doing a service yourself?
So when we first started, there may be 2 thoughts to explore. The first was the technology itself. We didn't seek to originally necessarily build the technology or manufacture it from the ground up. We thought, hey, let's take the path of least resistance, which is often the advice I'd give to an early stage company. And we were buying DJI drones off the shelf and trying to retrofit the hardware and software to be able to clean a building. The positives of that experience is we quickly proved, hey, drone cleaning as a concept could work. The downsides of that experience is we wasted endless money, a ton of time, and got to a point where we had to throw a Hail Mary pass, which was learn to build our own drones. On the other side, we didn't quite know the business model we wanted at the start. But what we did know is we could become the technology provider one day, but it would never matter if we didn't prove that drones could clean and clean well. So we started by doing the services. And for those of you who've never done exterior cleaning by hand, it can be very humbling. So in the span of a couple months, I cleaned over 50 properties, ranging from residential roofs to large condos to college campus buildings. You name it, I was from Maryland down to Florida, pretty much everywhere in between, cleaning by drone and by hand. And I've got some physical and perhaps emotional scars to tell the tales of those days. But anyway, we knew if we didn't prove, hey, we could do services with our drones, people will pay for this. This is just as good, if not better, than cleaning by hand. We were never going to get to the point of being able to be a technology provider. And to give a little bit of a why behind us being a technology provider, we didn't start off by saying, hey, let's go build cleaning drones. We saw a problem in the world, which is those workers are very high off the ground and that work has to get done. Could there be a safer, more efficient way to do it? And we thought drones was a really good option. So for us, once we got the drones to a functional point, the next question is, how do we maximize our impact? And it wasn't by us trying to become the best cleaning company. It was by us being really grounded in building frontier technology and then providing it to others to use so that they could make more money, they could do it in less time, and they could do it with a lot more safety involved.
Before we get into sort of what I'm going to call like the explosive era of Lucid, you've told me a story before that I feel like has to be shared. So I'm going to request that you share the $42 in the bank story.
Okay, sure. So I started Lucid alongside two very near and dear friends in college, Adrian and David, and we remain very close to this day. But I graduated a year early. They were going back for their senior year. And that summer in between, we were all working together, cleaning houses, learning the industry. And we'd pulled together our very limited savings as college students to buy, I think, like a $2,000 minivan, some pressure washing equipment, and a drone. And we got to the point where I think we were about a week away from them going back to class, and we had $42 left in our bank account. And I was a half step away from throwing myself a pity party. Why me? Like, why did I decide this is what I was going to do and forego all the other opportunities out there? And I got a call from a prospective investor I've been talking to. And he's like, hey, I'm really interested in what you're building. I'm interested in this market opportunity. Why don't you fly out to Chicago and meet with me next week? And without even thinking, my first reaction was, of course, yes, I'll be there. When, where, I can't wait. And then I hung up the phone and I was like, we got $42 in the bank account. And although this was several years ago, $42 was still not enough to buy a ticket from Charlotte to Chicago. So we ended up going door to door throughout Davidson, literally doing just that, door-to-door sales, trying to find somebody who wanted their house cleaned. And we ended up knocking on the door of one of my former Spanish professors from Davidson. And he was incredibly warm and welcoming. And he was like, if you sell me this job in Spanish, I'll give it to you. So I pitched him in my very broken Spanish, trying to figure out all the pressure washing and drone words and, making some up as I went along. And he was kind and gave us the job. And we did good work. So I think we made maybe $500 for cleaning everything around his house. And that was enough to buy a ticket to Chicago. And there I had, a lot of my family lives there, so I had a place to stay. But I still didn't really have money to Uber. So I ended up walking about 2 miles from my aunt and uncle's apartment to, I think it was a Hancock building in Chicago, where our first investor wanted to meet. And long story short, he's an incredible human being. He's been a long-time investor now with our company. and a personal mentor to me, but we were down to $42 and back against the wall, somehow found a way to land that first investor check. So Taylor, if you're listening to this, we owe you a lot of thanks and are very grateful.
Yeah, that's just an incredible story. I've heard it before, but it doesn't get old. Y Combinator is a startup accelerator program that helps take young companies with great ideas to the next level. Not only do they provide these companies with wonderful funding opportunities, but also to an invaluable amount of resources, including admission to a network of some of the most brilliant young business minds in the world. When you first decided to apply to Y Combinator, where kind of was your headspace? Was this like a very strategic decision, or was it like a, hey, we really need something to work, we're gonna, shoot the shot in the dark? Like where were y'all at that time?
I'm a bit frustrated you said shot in the dark, because that was the exact term I was going to use.
See, for once I'm beating you to something. Here we go.
So it was exactly that. We'd actually applied the summer before, didn't even get an interview. Statistically speaking, that made sense. It's very hard to get an interview there. But we applied again, and in the time we made a lot of progress. On that application, I had just spent about 2.5 months in this room above a garage, teaching myself mechanical, electrical, and software engineering to build our first drone. And I put together a drone that was a fraction of the cost of this DJI one we were flying. It could lift 2.5 times the weight capacity. And I was able to do some fairly basic programming where I could go out to a building, map it, flip a switch, the drone would fly a predetermined flight path, clean the building, and I could put the controller down and walk away as it did it all. I did not walk away because, again, safety and regulations and all that good stuff. But with that video, with that story, and with our business model idea of being the technology provider, they invited us out for an interview. So when I found out we got the interview, I was jumping for joy. I was like, holy cow,
yeah,
like, how did they pick us out of everyone? Because I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but I believe they said for our cohort, they received almost 15,000 applications. And then there ended up being about 200 companies that were accepted. So statistically speaking, it's pretty improbable, but really was a business-changing and I'd say personally life-altering experience to go through the program.
Can you talk a bit about your experience with Y Combinator and some of the lessons you learned and how that kind of not only shaped you but also shaped Lucid?
Sure. So I feel like the biggest thing any first-time founder struggles with is you just simply don't know what you don't know. And that sounds like a simple statement, but what I mean by that is oftentimes founders spend a ridiculous amount of time worrying about things that don't matter. Looking at the domain availability for some name for a company you think you want to start isn't where you should actually start. If you only get 2 things right as an early stage founder, it should be talking to your customers and knowing their problems, and then building a product that will actually solve those problems. So I feel like what Y Combinator did really well was they turned the light on in a lot of those dark corners, like how do I form a company? How do I raise capital? How do I hire? How do I sell? All these really good things that a business needs in order to function, to maximize the amount of time you got to spend talking to customers and building the product for those customers. And I'd say the second layer of value is just through the network. They say a rising tide, lifts all boats. That's very true at Y Combinator. You're in this room with profoundly brilliant people. A lot of people way smarter than I could ever hope to be, but all of a sudden they became my peers. So if I had a problem, I was getting to talk to people going through the same exact experience. Some might be a half step ahead or a half step behind. And having that type of network to pool resources, to pool knowledge, to have people you could ask advice to, it really accelerated our growth and our learning. And I think something I've tried to take to heart since we started is when you start a company in college, I think even to this day, in just about every meeting, I'm the youngest person in the room. And a lot of people would see that as a weakness, right? Like you don't know, again, what you don't know. But the question I tried to flip was, well, how do I turn that into a strength? And the way I've tried to turn that into strength is being very open-minded and surrounding myself with a network of wisdom, with diverse perspectives, And Y Combinator just accelerated that exact concept by allowing me to tap into a massive network of startups and founders who've been very successful and some who haven't. So I got to learn from the companies that went public and made it big, but also the companies that were really close and ended up failing.
That's definitely a very meaningful experience. And on that note, if, say, unfortunately, Lucid hadn't got accepted into Y Combinator, where do you think it would be today? Like, what extent has Y Combinator allowed for the growth that has occurred? Do you think it would still be around?
To be candid, I don't think it would be. Because going back to an earlier thought, starting a robotics company is very capital intensive. If anybody's looking to start their first company, I probably wouldn't recommend starting with robots because it's technically challenging and you need a lot of money. But the honest truth is if we didn't get that capital and if we didn't get the, let's call it brand stamp of, oh, this is a Y Combinator company, we wouldn't have been able to raise our first meaningful seed round, which was about a $1 million raise. And it allowed us to start making our first hires, really expand the value of the technology, and land our first couple customers. Because up until that, fundraising is hard. It's always hard. But it felt like a near insurmountable mountain because here I am sitting across from you, an investor, and I'm saying, hey, I'm 22 years old. I've got an econ and Spanish degree, and I want to start a robotics company. Will you write me a check?
Yeah, hard sell.
I'm fortunate. We had several people through the community and our network who did write those very early angel checks even before Y Combinator. But after Y Combinator, the perception is entirely different. Like, oh, if Y Combinator saw value in you, I should dig a little bit deeper. I should see beyond just what's on paper.
Does that stamp still have value today, even being well past?
It does in a lot of different ways. It's funny because outside of the startup world, I don't think enough people know Y Combinator. The best way I've ever heard Y Combinator explained to me is it's kind of the same brand effect as if you got an MBA from Harvard. Like, oh, they really know what they're talking about. Whether or not that's true, people can debate, but that's the perception in the startup world. So even on some of our most recent rounds, the best way to engage investors is through warm introductions. So finding somebody that they know, asking that person, hey, could you introduce me to Spencer?
Yeah.
Without Y Combinator's network, we would have had a fraction of the resources to continue raising, to continue expanding our investor network. So even to this day, we pretty heavily rely on the value of Y Combinator.
So you said that first major raise of around $1 million kind of allowed you to start hiring. What was hiring your first employee like? And on that note, even though obviously you had very substantial capital, there's still, when you're that early as a company, the future's pretty dim. You don't really know what's going to happen. And so having that responsibility of being in charge of someone's paycheck, of course you knew in the short term they would be okay, but a year down the line, did you have any worry that you were going to have to tell this person, like, hey, I'm sorry, I know you need this, but I can't provide it? Did that come with a degree of stress?
Yes and no. In terms of hiring the first person, I'll tell you, we had no process at the time. It was completely scattered, and we got immensely lucky. Our first employee is still with us today. And I remember being at Y Combinator, we're out in San Francisco, and I go on LinkedIn, I put in the filter, like, has to be located in Charlotte, and I just type in aeronautical engineer, and only one person popped up. And it ended up being who we hired, but I reached out to him, I said, hey, I'd love to learn your story, tell you a bit about what we're building. When we're back in the area, let's go grab lunch. And I think we had a number of conversations and meetings, and we keep leaning in, he kept leaning in, and it's worked out well ever since. But in terms of, let's call it the pressure of taking on headcount, taking on payroll, it's certainly very real. Like, we're now at the point where many of our employees, they have families, right? It's not just a bunch of single bachelors.
Right.
It's people who have kids going to college. And sure, in a way, the pressure mounts. But at the same time, my perspective has always been, if Lucid were to magically fall off the face of the planet tomorrow, what have we done in our time together? What have we learned together? And I hope years from now, we've got, just a multitude of people through what they've learned at Lucid going on to change the world in other very valuable and positive ways. I hope every person who joins our team never leaves, but I do hope that if somebody leaves, whatever they do next, because of what they learned at Lucid, they're that much more valuable because of it. So I'll certainly acknowledge when, you're in your 20s and you're worried about a couple dozen people in payroll, you don't have a lot of peers you can go and talk to about that stress. But I try to balance that with the grateful side of having the opportunity, having the privilege that we have a collection of brilliant people who you've gotten to know pretty well. And every day I get to come to work and I get to learn from them. I get to collaborate with them. And that really is a blessing.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic mindset to have, because it's so easy to find success and almost become seduced by that and be like, oh, I'm on top of things. I'm the one who knows everything. And I think always approaching things from a perspective of what can I learn from you? And that will always allow for so much more growth. And I think that's what allowed for Lucid to have such explosive growth like it has, because you're always ready to learn. You're never refusing to listen to someone simply because, you're the CEO. And I think that really is the way to go about that. So I applaud you for that approach.
Thank you.
So on that front, before we move away from the first employee, I've heard that there's quite a tale about you preparing this building for the first employee. What on earth happened with that? I'm very curious.
So, to be clear, I live a life of luxury as far as the office goes now, because my first form of a Lucid office was a $100 Walmart futon I had in my college dorm room. So that's the background we grew up in, and then slowly we moved to a garage and up from there. But when we had come back from Y Combinator, we raised that round of capital. We're like, we need actual space, because we can't hire someone and have them come work in our garage, especially for running CNC machines and flying drones in the backyard, which made our neighbors really dislike us. I don't know why. I thought it was cool, but they thought the noise was a little bit of a disturbance. So anyway, we'd found this property, and we'll soon be moving next door, which is exciting, and upgrading. But the tenant had been in here for a couple decades, so it was in bad condition. The rug was all stained, it had a weird smell, the paint looked awful on the walls, the bathrooms, I don't even know if they were functional, they looked really bad. But it was cheap and we could afford it, so it's what we ended up going with. And the landlord had 60 days to turn around the facility. And they weren't doing anything big. They were like, okay, we'll paint the walls, we'll replace the carpet, we'll update the bathrooms. They did one of those three things, which was update the bathrooms, so great, we knew they were gonna be functional. But they didn't tell us that they didn't paint the walls and they didn't change the carpet. So we got the keys on a Thursday, and our first employee is starting that next Monday. And we come in, the walls aren't painted, the carpet looks disgusting because now there's nothing in there and you can really see just how bad it was.
Nothing to hide it.
And the previous owner had put this fake wood floor down in the front that was chipping, and they glued it to the carpet. It was appalling to say the least. So we're like, okay, what can we do between now and Monday to make sure that our first employee doesn't want to walk out the door as soon as he walks in it? So I called my wife, and this is before we were married, so this was an even bigger ask. I said, can you come to the office and help us paint? We've got to paint all these walls. So every single wall in the commercial part of our office, we painted by hand. I don't know if this paint was popular yet, or we were just too cheap to realize we should have bought it, but we did not do the single coat stuff. So we had to do 3 coats because the walls are a lighter blue in there, and we were painting over a darker color. We're ripping out this glued down wood floor. We call the property manager just, pretty livid, hey, this was in the agreement.
You said you were going to do this.
Why hasn't this happened? And then the reasoning is, our paint and carpet guys are really behind schedule. And we were like, okay, we'll make some calls. So we were then calling all these different carpet companies, being like, who can come tomorrow? We'll take whatever you have as long as it's not awful. And we finally find somebody who's like, yeah, I can be there tomorrow if you finish painting today. So we're like racing to finish painting. We call the landlord and say, hey, we've got our own carpet person coming. We're invoicing you for the paint we're buying. We're invoicing you for this carpet company because you're in breach of the agreement. And then magically, he had just heard from his carpet guy that they could be there tomorrow to install it.
Of course.
So the good news is we didn't sleep much that Thursday night, but we painted everything. We got the carpet installed on Friday, and we then had to push our very early cubicle installation from Friday to Monday. So our first employee shows up through the door, and all we have is this table, literally this table we're sitting at. With a
How
couple,
cool is that?
we're still using
Yep.
it, so it's lived a good life. And I think we got this for $40 off Facebook Marketplace.
I mean, it's a nice table for $40.
We're sitting on folding chairs, and we're having a conversation about what it's going to be like to work at Lucid, what our vision is as there are workers coming in to install the cubicles. And I remember he left that day, and I thought it went okay, and I'm like, please come back tomorrow, please come back tomorrow. And he has every day since for the last 3.5 years and counting.
That's awesome. Do you by any chance have any photos of before when you first came in and were like, because if so,
we definitely have some action shots. Because here's the crazy part too. I remember this was supposed to be a joyous occasion, and my grandma and great aunt were going to be driving through Charlotte. So my wife and I were supposed to have dinner with him that Thursday night, and I, sheepishly called my grandma, and I was like, hey, Grandma, this thing happened. We're pretty tight on time. I don't think we're going to get to spend quite as much time as we hoped. She said, no problem. Do you have chairs? We'll just sit in chairs and keep you company while you paint. So
that's awesome.
I think we have a picture somewhere of my grandma and my great aunt sitting in this empty office as we're painting the walls, and we then had a glorious Bob Evans dinner after. But
that's awesome. If you wouldn't mind, send those over and we can include them in the podcast for everyone to see. I think they would appreciate that. That's really cool. I think that just shows your commitment to everything, and I'm sure that first day was one to be remembered.
Yes.
So on that note, what would you describe as, and I know this, there's probably a number of answers for this, but as the most distinct turning point for Lucid, where you feel like it really went from, you being scrappy in your garage, learning, fasting, whatever you could do to keep it running, to something where it really had become this whole entity almost?
I feel like it's always been a moving target. I think a lot of the things we've accomplished, if you'd asked my college self, hey, this is going to come true, would that have been the turning point? I probably would have gone, hell yeah, that's awesome. That happened?
Right.
Wow. I think it's two things. And one, it's people-oriented. When we first started, I was the head of insert every single department name, whether it was sales, product, you name it, I wore the responsibility. And that was really lonely because if we didn't succeed, there was nobody else to point to.
Right.
Not that you should ever point at anyone.
Right, and even when you do, there's no one to celebrate with.
Exactly. So it's the highs are lonely, the lows are lonelier. For me, it's always been continuing to bring on impact players. Because what happens as a company grows is early on, everybody's wearing so many different hats and you're just moving fast and you're trying so hard just to prove that it can work. And then it starts to work. And then you can bring on more people that can then focus on more things. And all of a sudden, the number of hats you wear start to decrease a little bit, but then you can be a bigger lever, have higher impact in what you're focused on. So now in terms of, let's call it day-to-day responsibilities, there are very few things that I need to own operationally because we're so well covered. And that feels like a pretty big turning point for me. Because going back to the $42 story, I remember asking Taylor, who's a very successful CEO in his own right of much, much larger companies than where Lucid is today. I said, what's one thing you wish you would have told your younger self? And he told me, fire yourself from as many jobs as possible. And I didn't quite understand what that meant at the time. But now I really do understand it. there are some things I was never really that great at business, but there was also a whole other set of things I was good at, but it drained my energy.
Yeah.
So it's like, figure out the things that you're not good at and try to delegate those as quickly as possible. And then slowly over time, you can start to find the things you may be good at or good enough at, but they don't give you energy or they're draining. And now you can start to share that responsibility. So I feel like I'm going through that turning point as we speak, just as we continue to grow the team and share those exact responsibilities. And I'd say maybe the more meaningful part is just becoming a legitimate business. And what I mean by that is when you set out to build frontier technology, and the way I define that is nobody else has built what you've built and done it successfully before. So you're pretty much having to write the story and playbook as you go. It is just so immensely difficult that oftentimes you feel, back to your point, that you're shooting in the dark. But then the product starts to work. You start to delight customers. Early products have endless issues, and that's a headache in and of itself, trying to fix those as quickly as possible. But it gets to the point where your customers start to change their businesses because of the product you've built. And that's been one of the most rewarding experiences. And now we understand who's our customer, where do we go to get more customers, how do we continue to grow and scale, and we're no longer having to rely on raising more and more money. We're now seeing a future where, hey, we could continue to grow this just off of the success of the business, off of getting more customers. And that was always the thing that, let's say of all things, stressed me out the most, is knowing you have to grow the organization, you have to continue to prove out the product, and the only way to do that early on was for us to raise more money. Again, if you're in a different type of business, software could be a good example. Sometimes you can bootstrap the whole thing, but when you're having to buy machines that cost tens of thousands of dollars and single chips or boards that cost thousands of dollars, that's not something you can often bootstrap in college.
Was this sort of process of, firing yourself from as many jobs as possible, was that hard at all? Was there a part of you that almost loved the rawness of just, every day, new problem, figure it out? Like, has it been hard for you to kind of make that transition from this, scrappy creative, and obviously we're still very creative, but
Sure.
to a more formal organization where, I feel like if I were to ever go through something like that, that would be something really hard for me to let go. And I'd be curious, have you struggled with that at all?
100%. And I think if anybody who tries to grow and scale a company tells you otherwise, they're probably lying to themselves. Every entrepreneur goes through this transition if the business is growing of you go from working in the business all the time to starting to work on the business. Working in is doing like all the day-to-day things that need to get done. So in the earliest years, that was me cutting carbon fiber, that was me doing the wiring, that was me doing flight tests, me personally training each and every customer, me answering the call late at night because a customer's on a job and they've got a question that needs to be answered. In a way, again, it can be relieving to start to delegate some of those responsibilities, but you also miss the hustle. You miss the excitement, the adrenaline. So early on, it was a challenge because oftentimes you are so intimate with the business and intimate with that specific skill set. Early on, you're going to do the job better than the person that you want to get into that position. And it's just like the curse of knowledge. But what I've learned is you need to be willing to give up control in a certain sense. And oftentimes that's letting people have controlled failures. So it's knowing, hey, something's going to go wrong at some point. And if I always feel the need to sit over your shoulder and watch everything you do and point out, hey, that's not going to work out, we're never going to get to where we need to go. So over time, I'd like to think I've gotten better at delegating, better at continuing to train and let's call it empower people to be really successful in their roles. But it's never easy just because there are a lot of things I absolutely love doing early on that I have a lot less time to do these days.
Getting back onto the timeline of Lucid, it's an unavoidable topic. Pandemic happens, right? Everyone's world gets shattered. And so, what was that week like where, that switch flipped where, it went, this is a problem and everything's going to have to shut down? Because being a startup at that time, I mean, that had to have been terrifying because, you're being told businesses are going to shut down. Anything that's not absolutely essential is cut. And so on that note, what was that initial feeling when that happened?
Gosh, so many emotions, so many thoughts. Maybe to rewind a week before shutdowns happened, it was what I felt was the biggest moment in our company's history. Funny enough, several months earlier, I'd been at a cousin's wedding, and one of their family friends owns a really, really large national cleaning company. It's like, oh, this is serendipitous that we're just, at the snack bar having a conversation. You run a cleaning company. I build technology for cleaning companies. And I ended up convincing them, okay, early spring, I'll come down to Charlotte. Let's do a demo. If I like what I see, we'll move forward with a drone. Yeah. So we had this whole thing mapped out, the whole entire day plan. He flew in from New York. We had this hotel about 10 minutes from the office we went to clean, and we cleaned it really well. And we're having a great lunch. He ends up signing a quote before he leaves, and we're high-five. We're like, yep, we're gonna have our first cleaning drone customer. And then a week later, shutdowns happen. And I remember giving him a call. I'm like, hey, so are we moving forward with this quote? Here's our wiring information. And he's like, look, I'm going to be honest. Our whole entire staff has been repurposed for disinfecting jobs. We're not going to be even thinking about exterior cleaning. Yeah. We don't even know what we're going to be doing next month. But we were focused on disinfecting. Is there anything you could do in disinfecting? Because that's probably the best way to stay alive. It was kind of like a literal and figurative statement. And I remember at that time, my first thought, it wasn't about the company failing. It was back to the question you asked earlier. I'm like, we then had a team of 6. I was like, how do I make sure they keep their jobs? This is a struggling labor market, obviously, with the pandemic. Everybody was getting really tight with their budgets. I'm just like, what could we possibly do right now just to keep the lights on, keep people employed? We didn't yet have customers, so my focus really was, how do we just live to fight another day? And fortunately, about a year prior to that, when we started building the technology, we made a bet, which was, let's not think about our drone as a cleaning drone. Let's think about it as a platform. And with this platform, we can put different top hats on it that do different tasks. So today it's cleaning, but tomorrow it could be something else productive. And that vision was put to the test far, far too early with the pandemic. But in a matter of weeks, with a really small team, we ended up building a drone that was capable of disinfecting these large stadium environments. I remember our first 2 customers were Texas A&M's athletic department and the Atlanta Falcons, which are laughably massive companies for an early stage company to land. And we slept very little to make sure this all happened. And at some point along the line of launching the disinfecting drones and being focused on it, we realized, hey, the pandemic isn't going to be here for forever, thank goodness. And we need to find a way to continue to build a sustainable company. So we started to figure out, how do we slowly reintroduce the cleaning drone? And around this time, the CDC also came out and said, hey, service transmission isn't really how this is spreading. So as a company that's always wanted to have an impact, to build technology that makes traditionally dull, dirty, dangerous jobs safer and more efficient, our heart wasn't in it anymore. And fortunately, things slowly got better with the pandemic. People really picked up the appetite for the cleaning drone, because even when our website was fairly disinfecting drone centric, we had the cleaning drone on there, and most of our inbounds were people asking about the cleaning drone. So long story short, without the disinfecting drone, Lucid wouldn't have been here. We had to do it to stay alive. We learned a lot of invaluable lessons. One, flying a drone inside a large stadium environment.
I was going to ask about that.
It's technically very challenging.
Right.
I'll never forget, the Atlanta Falcons have a distributed antenna system throughout their stadium, which gives you better, cellular connection during a game, because you've got tens of thousands of people in a pretty small footprint. Those distributed antenna systems emit very high electrical fields. And, high electrical fields can bias some sensors. So we had to figure out, how do we fly through these challenging environments? And a lot of the data we collected, a lot of the lessons we learned had direct implications for the cleaning drone, being able to fly near large built structures in complicated environments as well. Then I'd say on the other side, learning to manage customers of that scale, of that reputation, it was taxing, but we learned a ton, because we always thought, hey, how do we continue to make this technology more simple for new people to learn? How do we make it easier for them to do the regular maintenance? So there's a lot of carryover between the two products as well.
I mean, people can see these in the frame, like they're huge drones. And so it's not as simple as, your little camera drone flying that inside. And so I'm sure that was just, a feat of ingenuity that took to figure that out. When you did find out that, the way that it was being applied wasn't necessarily was how COVID was spreading, was that kind of like defeating at all for you, in the sense that like you'd put so much time into figuring out, how do we put this huge drone flying in these crazy situations, and then all of a sudden, one thing comes out and it's done?
It was immensely deflating, because part of being asked that question many years ago of, what is it you really want to do? Go do that. What I wanted to do was make an impact. I often reflect, and so much of my life has been just me being blessed to be in certain situations. So I live by the motto is, I continue to climb, how can I lift up others? And I saw the best way to do that through entrepreneurship. And I was like, beyond just, creating hopefully a sustainable business where people want to come to work, I want to create a product that impacts a lot of lives. So at the start of the pandemic, when we thought, oh my gosh, this is going to save lives and allow people to enjoy their life, that was a really fulfilling thought. And then once we knew, hey, this is really not as effective as once thought, our heart wasn't in it anymore. So
yeah.
we very quickly pivoted back to the cleaning drone.
And I would say, Lucid is pretty heavily known for the cleaning drone. That all being said, y'all have been engineering a number of frontier new technologies. You're currently developing an automation system so that the drones can do it, and you even said you kind of did a very early version of that way long ago, but now y'all are really working on expanding that out. You've also done prototypes with delivery, and we even have a new product coming out now. Yeah. And so we'll get into that in a little bit. Okay. So I don't want you to talk about the new product quite yet. But on that note, how do you think you have positioned Lucid in a way that has allowed you all to, attack these industries so aggressively at such an intense rate? It feels like the idea for the delivery drone came, and then not too much later, you had a successful prototype. And what have you done within the company that has allowed you all to be able to shift so much? And even on that note, did what you learned from the disinfecting drone play a note in that, because you had to shift so quickly?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we learned is the value of culture. Like, we have a culture of speed, and that's really been with us from the start. And a lot of that was because of constraint, right? We didn't have the money, we didn't have the people. So we had to come up with really creative solutions to move quickly, just to, survive to fight another day. And that's remained with us. And even as we grow, we often think in terms of days and weeks, where I think a lot of companies think in months and years. And then I'd say the other part is strategy. And when I say strategy, there's a favorite question investors love to ask. And when I ask it back to them, there's never really a great answer. And that's like, what is your competitive advantage as a company? And we could sit here and drone on, no pun intended, about intellectual property, data moats, distribution moats, you name it. And, in an MBA class, those all might matter. But in reality, for a lot of companies, especially early stage companies, success in beating the competition is all about hustle and execution. So shortening iteration cycles is crucial to what we do here at Lucid. And I think the success of a lot of other early stage companies. So on the strategy front, we said, what do we know to be true about this market, about this opportunity that we need to get right? So one of the things we bet on early was building a platform technology rather than just building an isolated use case. Sure, the platform has been catered to a specific use case of cleaning to start, but we can take the same exact frame and very quickly put a tank on it and do agriculture. We could put the delivery payload we built and do delivery drones. And when you think about drones, the regulatory environment's evolving so quickly, as those things come online, well, great, we've now done all the other essential business things like build scalable production, build customer support systems. And that's, I'd say, kind of the bread and butter, what's allowed us to move quickly. Maybe one other point on strategy is early on, we tried to go the route of using a Chinese manufacturer of technology to work for this application. The two painful learning lessons were, one, the technology didn't work the way we needed it to, and the iteration cycle of working with somebody overseas was far too long for what we needed. And then two, robots are like cars. They're these physical systems that do these productive tasks, and they're going to need maintenance. The same way I need to change the tires on my car, I've got to change the motors on my arms. So if we didn't build up the muscle internally to produce our drones in-house and support our drones in-house, we were never going to succeed in this service-based customer profile, because every single day our customer has an issue and their robot isn't operating, that's revenue loss. So building domestically is another key component of part of making this successful, because if you came in tomorrow morning and you said, hey, could you get a drone to do this? Could you get a robot to do this? We've probably got 95% of the parts to do it. And we've got all the talent internally to combine those mechanical, electrical, and software systems to see, hey, does Spencer have the next great idea we should bring to market?
So as you've been referencing, Lucid's been growing pretty substantially. Right now we're sitting in what's been Lucid HQ for a good while, right? Well, a pretty exciting thing, and I think you mentioned it earlier, is we're actually moving next door to a space that's double or triple the size, right?
Yeah, it's about triple the size.
That's pretty wild. It feels like every few weeks here, there's a new face, and it's really cool because I'm getting to meet so many awesome people. But on that note, how long have you been in this space, and did you expect to be needing to leave it at this time, or is this highly unexpected?
I don't think I ever knew when we would leave the space, but it was October of 2019 when we first got the keys here, and our lease was for 4 years. And back to maybe why we had some scuffles with the landlord early on. Here I'm like 22, and I'm about to lease a 6,000 square foot office and warehouse, and he was kind of like demeaning about it. He's like, are you kids even going to be able to pay for this? And we're like, here's our bank statements. Like, we're a business. We've got money. We're going to be able to pay you. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, this is a 4-year agreement. Like, hopefully we're still around for 4 years, because the truth of it is many startups aren't still around after 4 years. So I don't think I ever actually got too far ahead in those early days of when will we be moving from this space. I just thought, wouldn't it be nice to make it all the way through this term and, kind of as a, I showed you we could do it. But it feels just fantastic to be moving to a new space. If you walk through Lucid right now, there's this luxurious like $50 Amazon desk that's kind of in the middle of everything that I work at. It's nice and cozy. It's got a $10 chair next to it.
A beautiful chair and desk.
At one point in time, I used to work in another secluded part of the office that had no windows. I used to call it the dungeon. And in this new office, there's a chance I might have a little bit more workspace and a window, which is an exhilarating thought.
That is moving up. But yeah, that's very exciting. What would you say you're looking forward to most in the new space? Like, what is the biggest bottleneck right now that moving into this new space will have?
I think the biggest one is there will be a lot more dedicated meeting spaces. So right now, all our conversation happens out in the open, which is awesome because it creates a really cool culture. But it can also be distracting because sometimes you just want to do heads down work. And In this new office, there are going to be a lot more dedicated closed room spaces where you can meet with your department, you can cross-collaborate across multiple departments. Obviously, the warehouse is massive, so we can do a lot more cool things with the production area. I think maybe the thing I'm most excited about that people wouldn't guess is we're putting together a content studio in the office. So a dedicated room meant for content, meant for hopefully more opportunities just like this where we're not having to move around a lot of different pieces.
The amount of preparation we've done for this is insane. This is the manufacturing line for the record.
And I feel like it's worth noting, it is currently the summer in North Carolina. We are in a non-air conditioned warehouse. So
if you can't tell, we're both sweating a little bit.
If our skin looks like it's glowing, it's because it is.
There you go. One thing I really like about you is I feel like you're a human, which I know this is a ridiculous thing to say, but I feel like so many CEOs are these faceless entities who kind of hide in the dark and just collect off everyone else's work. You're not like that, though. I see you in the warehouse, sweating during times like this, not just for podcasts, but, working on robots. It's really cool. And, you're meeting with everyone, not just the management level people, but everyone. You even make time to, speak with a random summer employee like me. And even just a bizarre example is a couple days ago, you and I were in my driveway building a giant wooden crate for trade shows. Never in my life would I expect that I'd be, in my driveway with a very busy CEO of a tech company building a giant wooden crate. That's, astonishing to me. But on that note, I think whether intentional or not, the way you carry yourself creates an environment that allows people to be equally passionate as you about what's going on here and what's happening. And I think, the subtleties in the way you lead are just so meaningful. And I think it's created a culture that's allowed for people to just move so fast here. And I think that is part of why Lucid is just able to be exploding like crazy. And I think that's incredible. On that note, what are your philosophies on leadership and management and even building a positive and thriving culture in a company?
Gosh, one, thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you joining me in that Saturday endeavor of building
awesome.
An obnoxiously large trade show crate for our sales team.
We'll pull out the clip of us trying to load it.
Yeah. And for context, we're still very frugal. That crate, I think, could have been custom built for $2,500.
We were looking at some quotes.
I think for a couple $100 of wood and a little bit of sweat, we got it done.
Heck yeah.
On the topic of leadership and management, you could read endless books, and I love books. But I think there are a couple key tenets of my leadership philosophy, and the first one starts with compassion. I think going back to my high school days, this is something I've always tried to be steeped in, is just treating others kindly. It sounds so simple, but genuinely caring for someone. I think one of the models I try to live by is people will never care how much you know until they know how much you care. And there's this weird conversation that goes on where people talk about work-life balance or work-life separation. And I don't know how much I agree with it, because I think it's all about work-life rhythm. At the end of the day, if something's happening in my personal life, it will creep into my work, whether it's good, bad, etc. And if we just ignore those things and don't actually care about what's going on with the people around us, I think we're getting off on the bad foot. And I'd say the second key tenet for me with leadership is curiosity. I like to think I'm very open-minded. I'm always the first in the room to ask a question. And to your point earlier, I live by the philosophy I can learn something from anyone. So oftentimes I'll ask a question before I assert an opinion. And I'd say maybe the last one, which has two different segments to it, is consistency. I feel like to be a good leader, people need to know what they can expect out of you. The startup life is such a roller coaster, which is an overused term, but it's true. The highs can be like the highest of highs, and it's just pure joy and elation. And then the next moment, you could be completely at the bottom, like there's a fire, whether, again, literal or figurative, that you've got to go race to put out. And that can cause a lot of whiplash. And the motto I try to live by is an expression called mind like water, where if you've ever gone out to a pond and you've skipped a rock, when it makes that first bounce, second bounce, for me, I'm not that good, so I might only get 2 bounces. When it hits the water, you see this perfect reaction, these waves of circles forming, and it's like this perfect equilibrium. And then seconds later, the pond is completely calm again. And I feel like that's what leaders need to embody, is there's always going to be some type of input, some type of change, and you need to be able to do that slight mending and bending, to form those circles, to be able to react to it, and then you need to come right back down to that resting level. I thought I was going to be done with my list, but I'll add one more, which is really leading by example. And I think this goes back to my days as an athlete. What I'm probably worst at is delegating jobs that I think aren't fun to do. Like even today, we were out testing the new product, which I won't get too far into, but part of it is I knew we had to do a very small section by hand, and whoever did it was going to get absolutely covered in mud. I took it, I did it by hand, and I'm like, I'm going to be the one to roll up my sleeves and sweat, because there's going to come a time where I have to ask you to do the same. And if I don't show you that I'm willing to do that, that I'm willing to go the extra mile for you, for this company, it's then very difficult for me to turn around and ask that of you.
That's a wonderful answer. So you're 27, right?
Correct.
You're very young, you know, to be in the position that you're in. And I think, you know, the reason you've made it this far is what we've been talking about for the past hour. I think we've explored a lot of, you know, these wonderful traits that you've built up through your experiences. But on that note, you know, there's a certain perception that comes with being young. And I'd be curious to hear, has that ever created struggle for you? Has there ever been, you know, instances where people are like, you know, this kid can't run a company, you know, who is this kid? Like, and has that gotten in the way, and how has that kind of affected you, if it has?
Oh gosh. I think it's affected me less than I would have anticipated. Maybe early on when there was nobody else and it was literally just me showing up to sell a big customer or to try to convince an investor we were, you know, worth investing in. That was difficult because I think age in a way hurt me, but also age has helped me a lot too. To give one specific example, I remember at Y Combinator's demo day, which is when you pitch in front of all these investors, Paul Graham, who's one of the founders of Y Combinator, probably the most brilliant startup mind there is, came up, started talking to me, wanting to learn more about the drones. We're having a really good conversation about the drones, and he asked the question, well, how'd you get started? So I told him a little bit of our background and story, and he was like, you started this company in college, and you just saw a problem and wanted to go build a solution? Can I give you money? And it was like a 5-minute conversation, and we ended up getting one of the most notorious investors as an investor in Lucid.
That's really cool.
And that time, I think the age bias worked in my favor.
Right.
Because he's like, wow, you're this young and you've committed yourself to solving this problem. That's something I want to support. So overall, I'd say being young has actually helped me more than it's hurt me. And also, when you're young, you've got a lot less life commitments. When I first started, I had a girlfriend who's now my wife. We've been together for almost a decade, which is crazy. But then we eventually move in together, we get married, my responsibilities start to change. We don't yet have kids, but one day we will. And when you're young and don't have all those responsibilities, like in the first year of building Lucid, I was living on my own, again, in that room above a garage. So I could wake up in the morning and start working, and then work until I wanted to fall asleep or until I got tired. I didn't have a pet, I didn't have a wife, I didn't have kids. I could dedicate myself very fully to the company. So for a lot of the earliest moments in Lucid's history, if I didn't have that massive commitment of hours and effort, it would have been a lot harder.
You know, being young, everyone as they grow up makes mistakes, right? It's part of life. And on that front, you know, I'd be curious for you to talk about, what would you say is your largest failure that you personally did related to Lucid?
Oh gosh.
And what did you learn through that failure? And how did you, still get through it on the other side? I think it takes a lot of humility to admit one's own failure. And I think, you'd have the ability to see that in yourself and use that to grow.
Gosh, there have been countless mistakes. And I'll try not to pontificate too much on the concept of failure, but I will if you'll just humor me for a second.
Yeah.
I've always viewed failure a little bit differently, because what I like to think is failure is not final so long as you learn from it. So every time there's been, let's call it a surface level failure, what somebody would qualify as a failure, my first question is, well, did we learn something from this that now improves the next decision we make? As long as that's true, I don't truly feel like it's a failure. But to answer the question, I think the most specific form of failure would have been a business model one. When we started, we knew we needed to raise money, and raising money is hard. And we knew if we could tell investors, hey, we've got recurring revenue, it might be a little bit easier to raise that money. So we're like, okay, we're going to lease our drones rather than sell them, which meant our customers would pay us monthly. And what we found was a couple things. One, this customer base wants to buy their stuff. They like the thought of ownership. It's theirs, it's their possession, and they didn't want to lease. But we're like, well, we've got to lease because that's what investors are saying they want. And we were almost tone deaf to our customer base. Nonetheless, people were so excited we were getting some leases, but we got to this point relatively early on where we were selling, leasing more and more drones, and it would take a good while before those drones would become profitable. But again, investors told us recurring revenue mattered, but what really mattered is cash flow. So we were leasing more and more drones, and we're looking at our bank account, and we're like, gosh, if we keep being successful with customers, we're actually going to put ourselves out of business. And we'd invested all this time and money in forming a lease agreement, forming a strategy around leasing drones, until finally we said, you know what, if we don't pivot and start selling our drones and collecting the cash up front, even if our customers want to finance with someone else, we're going to go out of business. And then when we did that, we're like, wait, it's even easier to get new customers now because this is what they always wanted. And we were running into a wall with a lot of resistance, and it took us a while to realize we should alter our business strategy. And it was kind of facing that bank statement reality of, if we continue on this path, we're not actually going to be a viable, sustainable company.
So Lucid has kind of just recently undergone a pretty large rebrand. In fact, like even the shirt you're wearing now is a little outdated. It's kind of retro now. And so, formerly Lucid went by Lucid Drone Technologies, but now it's going by Lucid Bots. Can you talk a bit about the rebrand and kind of why the decision was made to do this?
On the surface, when people go to our website or previously have gone to our website, I think their first association is Lucid builds drones that clean buildings. Right. Which is true. But the reality, if you ask anybody here at Lucid and you ask them to say, hey, what is it you do here at Lucid? People will recite our exact vision and mission, which is we aim to uplift humanity by building the world's most productive and responsible robots. And the cleaning drone is chapter one of that story. So we've had a pretty long, well-written chapter one, and we're continuing to grow the cleaning drone. It's such a massive market, and we've got endless opportunities to make the product better. We're going to continue to do that for as long as we know Lucid. But what we realized as we started building the cleaning drone is we were solving really monumental technical problems. Yeah. And things that surprised us just by putting these drones into these environments. We're like, how could we take this function and put it on another drone, put it on another robot to do yet another productive task? And that's what we're really excited about, is we're launching our new product. Is it okay if I start to lead into it?
That's the next topic, so it's a perfect segue.
What I'll say is we never cared as much about the features of the technology, right? When most people talk about sales and talking to customers, sometimes we're like, how long's the battery life? And They want to focus on pressure and flow rate and all these technical details. What we want to focus on as a company is, what is the outcome that customer is trying to achieve? Because that's what we want to build a solution for. So for the cleaning drone, it was people who wanted a safer way to do the work, people that wanted to get the work done in a fraction of the time, so they make more money, they have better profits. Those are the outcomes we want. The features are just a way by which we help achieve it. And over the last several years, through a lot of conversations with our customers, they've had some great thoughts and suggestions. But one of the biggest refrains we've heard is, hey, the drone is great for cleaning vertical surfaces, roofs, it's awesome. But could the drone clean flat surfaces? And that's kind of a funny concept, right? Why would you have a flying device clean something on the ground and fight gravity? It's just not an efficient equation. So we started to ask ourselves, well, how could we use some of the technology, use some of our skill set, use our customer base to provide value in a whole new way, which is a ground-based robotic pressure washing system that's more efficient, it's safer. You're not holding a pressure gun closed all day and having your bones fuse over the years. You're not going home at the end of the day covered in mud. So it's really exciting to be introducing that to the market, because it's just a continuation of our vision, and it's more or less our coming out party. At Lucid, we know we are a company that wants to build responsible robots that are doing these productive tasks. And again, the cleaning drone was just the starting place. But now with our team, with our foundational technology, we've got essentially an open canvas on where we go next.
Yeah, and the new surface cleaning robot, I've gotten to use it. And, I'm by no means in the pressure washing business at all, but I have, not frequently, but every time it comes around, pressure wash my own driveway. And even someone who doesn't really do it regularly, like, the difference is unbelievable. Like, this is the kind of thing where, like, it was once a sweaty, physically demanding task. And, that was for me doing it once every 6 months. Yeah. Some of these people are doing it every day. And to see how much it was, like, crazy to me, it's almost impossible to imagine the difference that this can make in the people who really have to do this every day's life, because now they can, stand in the shade. It's so much healthier for them. It's really spectacular what it can do, and it works, and that's obviously the most important thing. A lot of people see new technology and they're like, oh, it's all these problems are going to happen, but people have seen surface cleaners before, and now you have control of that without having to manually move it around, and that's pretty spectacular. And so how do you think this new product fits into the mission statement of Lucid? I know I just touched on it a little bit, but I think you'll be able to give a more elegant answer on that front.
I think it's right in line with what we want to do, right? We think about these dull, dirty, dangerous tasks that people don't really want to do, right? The refrain you'll probably hear me say a lot is, robots aren't a way by which we replace human touch, it's a way by which we extend our reach, because we're creative beings, we're problem solvers. So robots help us more efficiently do these mundane, repetitive tasks, so we can then go solve increasingly meaningful problems. That's been true throughout the history of technology, whether it was the Industrial Revolution, as we started to introduce cars and airplanes, the internet, now AI. Like, each frontier of technology has unlocked new opportunities, unlocked new careers. So we really think about all the endless possibilities of what robotics can offer us as a human society, and it's really a beautiful future we're moving toward. Maybe to tell 2 quick stories about working on some job sites with customers with this new product. One of our customers, I had no idea how much of a toll doing flat work, cleaning and pressure washing took on people's bodies. He's been in this business for 15 plus years, and he and his wife are like actively looking at, how do I get out of the business for my health? His bones in his hands are fusing together from holding the gun shut. But he's like, hey, this is what I'm really good at. I built a great business. Yeah. It's almost crazy to think about leaving it behind, but my body can't take it anymore. I'm dragging around this massive pressure washing hose, and it's heavy and I'm out in the sun day after day and I'm squeezing this trigger. But now with the robot, they don't have to do any of this. The robot does the hard work so that you can really focus on taking care of your body and again, solving more and more meaningful problems. And the second story to share is just about quality and consistency. Having pressure washed a lot of surfaces, over time, as you get tired, your speed starts to vary, your lines and passes, they might not be as straight as they were at the start. And I know I'd experienced this, but I went out to a customer who was using the robot for the first time, and he said something fairly simple, but it was profound to me. He's like, look, man, I'm out here every night cleaning, and he's on the gas station crew, so he's cleaning Circle K's and stuff like that. And he's like, in minute 10, I am a great worker, I'm a great cleaner, I'm consistent, I'm efficient. By hour 10, I am not that person. My body hurts, I'm sloppy, I'm slow. I get into the truck at the end of the night and I almost don't have the energy to make it home because my body has taken such a beating. And gosh, I said only 2 stories, but I gotta go with a third because this is another meaningful one. So with a customer who was cleaning an NFL stadium, and seeing our robot cleaning an NFL stadium was a surreal experience and brought me back to some of the disinfecting drone days. But this is a much more sustainable product, so even more exciting because of it. The technician that day, he was cleaning this massive part of the concourse, and he ended up knocking it out in about 10 minutes. And he's like, before this would have taken me at least twice as long because I'm dragging the hose and I'm turning at these passes as he's walking me through his mental equation of doing it by hand. He didn't take a step. He's like, what you don't realize is I'm walking behind the surface cleaner for hours and hours and hours, and I'm logging countless miles. He's like, I just did all this cleaning without taking a step. So it's those little things you don't think about that really have a meaningful impact on the quality of their lives.
That's incredible. And to see, even in today's world, the difference that these robotics are making, what's your take on what's happening here as far as the future is concerned? What could the world look like when, you all have had another 5 years to keep innovating, to keep changing the game? How do you think the end game looks with this technology? What happens in society?
I think we continue to become increasingly creative. Think about the jobs that existed 100 years ago versus the jobs that exist today. There was no such thing as a social media influencer. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, right?
Yep.
So we're becoming increasingly creative in our occupations. And I think that's something a lot of people have fear of. We have fear of the unknown, like, oh gosh, a robot's gonna take our job? What happens if AI becomes increasingly powerful? And we could probably what if ourselves to death, but the question I like to ask is, what if it's even better than we can imagine? And I think robots offer us a route by which we solve some of the most meaningful problems that still afflict humanity, whether that be hunger, homelessness, happiness, like freeing people from the drudgery of a physically repetitive task and allowing them to go and do a more creative, problem-solving oriented occupation. That's a very fulfilling endeavor. Automating farming practices to such an extent that we can now farm an abundance of apples that cost much less, so people don't go as hungry.
Yeah.
The list of opportunities are quite literally endless, and I think that's what I get really excited about is how do robots continue to unlock new opportunities for us to just achieve higher levels of prosperity as a society?
It sounds like there's a really exciting future ahead, and I can't wait to see what happens, how Lucid grows, how even other robotics companies can come up with solutions as well. So it's definitely an exciting time. On that note, we're coming to the end of the podcast. So for one final question, I would imagine some people watching this are very young, ambitious people like you once were, and what would you? I'd like you to give them just one very meaningful, what you think would be the most important piece of advice for someone who may have that ambition that you once had to pioneer something new, to start their business, to whatever it may be. what do you think is the most meaningful piece of advice that even you could have heard that would have changed the game for you?
Gosh, I think we could have a whole nother podcast just on this one question. There's so much I wish I could tell my younger self, but I think above all else, the one that's been most impactful is the value of a growth mindset. And this is applicable not just in business, but in life in general. And the basic way it plays out is there's kind of binary bins, and life is rarely binary, but there are those who have a fixed mindset. It's, I am good at these things, I am not good at these things, that's who I am, that's the way I will always be. So a good example would be the kid who says, I am good at math, but I am bad at English. On the other side, you've got the growth mindset, which you may be currently good or bad at things. And I always like to add the word, like, for now, right? Because our minds are incredibly malleable, and we are capable of learning, we are capable of growth. So I might say something like, I'm not good at Mandarin yet.
There you go.
Because today I'm not good at Mandarin,
right.
But I have the capability to learn a new language if I wanted to commit myself to it. And that is such a valuable learning lesson for anyone to learn, but especially young people to learn. And I wish I had a little bit more of that. I think I was fortunate to learn it relatively young. But when we first started the company, I was like, we're not going to build the drones from the ground up, even though it makes a lot of sense, because I don't know how to build drones. And it wasn't until we were faced with a business life or death scenario of, well, if we don't learn to build drones, we're never going to do it. And I had to just try it. And then I figured out, wait, I'm actually capable of learning and growing a lot more than I ever gave myself credit for. And that's been so impactful in my business career, because every day there's a new challenge that needs to be solved. And instead of feeling overwhelmed by, oh gosh, I don't know the answer yet, I now get to lean on, well, I've solved all these other problems that I didn't once know the answer to, and I've had to learn new things, acquire new skills. That's something I carry with me week in and week out here at Lucid, and something I would highly emphasize for young people is you are capable of greatness, you are capable of learning. Don't set self-limiting beliefs as something that holds you back.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's getting pretty late here. We're, what is it, nearing 9 or 10. But on that note, I really appreciate you doing this. I think a lot of people are going to find value from this, hearing from your wisdom. So, and who knows, maybe we'll do another follow-up in like 5 years and find out where things have gone. But thank you so much, and I hope everyone enjoyed the podcast.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Woo! Golly, it is hot.
Yeah.
I should not have worn a hoodie for this. I bet you that's what everyone's going to say. They're going to see this and be like, why are you talking about how hot it is and you're in a hoodie?